Good afternoon, and welcome to today's TQ Solutions overview on accelerating time to competency. In the next few minutes, we're going to take a look at the TQ talent management software and touch on several items on how we can accelerate time to competency. So how do we leverage the talent management software to do that? So a couple of things that we're going to touch on are going to be how do we identify, define, and then leverage our organizational competencies throughout our talent management processes. From there, how do we measure competency proficiencies at an individual level? And once we've done that, how do we identify gaps in those competencies and then put together goals and development items to address and increase those competency gaps? Then from there, maybe more holistically, how do we identify what are our strongest competencies as an organization, not just at the individual level? And what are our weakest competencies? And then lastly, how do we measure ongoing progress with these competency proficiencies and improvement? Okay, so we are going to log in here momentarily into our demo database with the fictitious company Ferrum Analytics. I'm going to log in as Carmen Hernandez, and Carmen is a manager within Ferrum Analytics, and as such, she has a number of activities and that she can complete relative to the talent management process, as well as visibility, of course, into her team. So upon logging in, as we can see, Carmen can see her full dashboard of what she needs to do from an activity standpoint. There's also some quick links that we have across the top up here for Carmen to very quickly access information, not only about herself, but about her team, dashboards to view what's going on in all of these different areas, whether it's compensation and performance and succession planning, et cetera, and performance journal and some quick search capabilities. But I'm going to start in this session today when we're talking about accelerating time to competency. And let's first take a look within here. Carmen also has some administrative rights, and we want to take a look at the core competencies that we've identified for Ferrum Analytics that we can then leverage throughout the rest of the talent management processes. So as you can see here, within the TalentQuest solution, we can take any of the competencies that you have in your organization, show your custom competency models. Those can be all the way down to functional competencies or job-specific competencies. We can load them into the application, and as we can see here, we can group them by categories. We can identify our competencies, identify the specific behaviors within each of those competencies, and then from here, we can decide which of these competencies apply to the different levels within the organization, and then those can be leveraged throughout the rest of the processes. So whether it's in performance management or through a 360 survey, et cetera, we can take and leverage those competencies again throughout our talent management process. Okay, so once we've loaded those competencies within the application and we push them out into ways to measure competency proficiency. So let's take a look at a couple ways which we can do that. One, of course, would be through filling out a performance review. So here, Carmen has an activity or a task to complete a performance review for Rollo Banks, one of her direct reports. And we're going to click into this appraisal here. And what we're going to see is a number of things that have been automatically pulled into this performance review. One that we're going to see is we can see the goals that Carmen and Rollo set for Rollo at the beginning of the year that have been pulled into this review to be evaluated against. So we can see what that goal is, put our ratings in here, we can see any progress that was reported. But more importantly, and more relevant to today's topic, is the competencies themselves. So here we can see we've got a number of competencies in here around coaching and developing and our specific behaviors with that. We've got some around influence, relationships, etc. So Carmen can use this performance review to rate Rollo on how he's doing, which I've already started to do that. I've rated his influence as a 3, relationships a 4. Very easy for me to rate Rollo on all these competencies to see where do I think he stands. Now, another nice piece when doing this is we can actually see how does Rollo think he's doing on these individual competencies. So I can see his self-rating as I'm doing this to understand any gaps there and then be prepared to understand those differences and communicate those differences. So as we can see very quickly here, I can come in and really take a look at how do I measure and assess these. So that's a quick, easy way to do so. One other way in which we can do this, which we'll touch on in a minute, is really around using a 360 to measure competency proficiency as well. That process allows us to not only get feedback from me as the manager, but also for me as the manager to see how is he perceived by those that work around him. But before we get to that, Carmen also wants to go in and let's take a look at Rollo's profile. And as you can see with a couple of strokes of the keyboard here, I can go into Rollo's profile, and I really want to take a look at some past competency scores. And we can see that front and center right here on Rollo's profile. Up top, we can see some metrics that we're measuring, and we've got a couple competencies that we wanted to call out in here. We can see one around communication, one around leadership. We can make these whatever we want them to be. But as you can see, I can see how is his rating on this particular competency trended over time. I can see that on these other areas as well, and again, understanding what that trend is. And once I've understood that, I can see, all right, from here, we know some areas that we want to work on. We can maybe see what particular goals is Rollo working on at the moment, both from a performance standpoint, but from a development standpoint as well. But maybe before that, I want to check his most recent 360. We talked about 360 being another way to measure competency proficiency. So we're going to go in and look at Rollo's past 360, his most recent one, and pull this report up. And from here, again, within a couple of clicks, I get very easy access to Rollo's 360 and really can understand how not only do I perceive his competency proficiency, but how do his direct reports perceive he's doing? How do his peers perceive he's doing? And how does he think he's doing it? And understanding those differences. So here we can look at it more holistically, but then we can also see on a competency by competency basis to understand those differences, those strengths. So as you can see, lots of information and data in here, and very helpful for me to see, is Rollo overrating himself in any areas, or in this case, is he underrating himself compared to his manager, peers, and direct reports. So lots of good information in here. Additionally, at the end of this 360, and I'm going to scroll down here, we can automatically identify the strengths from a competency standpoint that Rollo has, as well as some areas for improvement. Now, we can take this one step further, because it's always important to understand how someone's perceived and what their competency proficiencies are, but just as importantly, what are we going to do about it? So as we can see here in this coaching and development section, the application is automatically going to recommend resources to address these lower rated competencies. So here we can see some books, we can see some coaching tips for me as the manager to coach him up around this area, but we also see that it's identified an e-learning course from the learning management system to enroll Rollo in to, again, address this area of the need for better communication. So very quickly, I can get visibility to this information and understand what are his competency proficiencies, where are those gaps, and then what do I need to do to enroll him in learning, to coach him up to bridge those gaps and develop those gaps. Okay, so again, so far we've taken a look at what are the competencies that we want to assess within the organization, and how do we do that? How do we measure competency proficiency? We can do that through performance reviews. We can do that through 360. From that, we can understand those gaps and put together development plans and development items and understand how he's working on those types of things. Now let's take it from the individual level more to the organizational level. And let's take a look at maybe how do we see what are our strongest rated, highest rated competencies in the organization, again, across the board, not just at the individual level, and maybe what are some of our lower rated competencies. From there, we can then get good visibility into maybe some broader training needs that are needed throughout the organization and not just at an individual level. So I've now clicked into one of our dashboards within the application to take a look at the information that we can see within here. And as we can see here, not only can I see distribution of ratings, from either performance evaluations here. But as we were discussing, I can see what are my top 5 rated areas as well as my bottom 5 rated areas. But I want to drill down into the actual competencies themselves and understand what are our 5 lowest rated competencies throughout the organization, again, to give me that visibility and understand what do I need to go do about it. So here we can see we've got some pretty good ratings, but these are our lower ones around strategy, coaching and development, relationships, influence, and vision within the organization. So those can be areas that I want to work on. Further, if I wanted to get down into some of these areas around competency groups or specific items, I can certainly do so by interacting with these dashboards to give me more and more visual information. Okay, so now that we are armed with that information around some of the broader organizational items, we can then leverage that data and figure out what do we need to do from a learning standpoint, and can very easily go into the learning management system. We could go into the course catalog here and know that there's a number of courses that we want to assign out to the organization, maybe based on this. I can search through and identify what those courses are, and then within a couple of clicks automatically enroll either the entire organization or group of people into a very targeted e-learning course or instructor-led training, whatever it may be, that we know will address the competencies that we want to develop. Okay, well, I think that sums up today's TQ Solutions overview. And just to recap, we have taken a look at portions within the TQ talent management software that address how do we accelerate time to competency. We talked about how do we identify the organizational competencies, how do we measure competency proficiency, how do we identify gaps, how do we, with those gaps identified, how do we assign learning and development to address those, and then how do we have visibility to organizational needs from a competency standpoint, and again address those. So thank you so much for your time today. Hope you enjoyed today's TQ Solutions overview, and hope you will join us for ones in the future. Thanks so much.